Let me apologize for my delay. There was a moment of silence in remembrance of the 23 people who lost their lives in the tornado in Alabama on March the 3rd. That tornado, of course, killed the 23 people in Lee County, Alabama, which is adjacent to my district, but the tornado also came across from the Alabama, the west side in Alabama, of the Chattahoochee River over into Harris County and into Talbot County, which is in my congressional district. And I was standing with my colleagues from Alabama as we remembered and had our thoughts and prayers going out to those people impacted. So I apologize for keeping you waiting, but I think it was for a worthy cause, and I appreciate your patience. Let me just welcome everyone to today's hearing, especially our witnesses, Ms. Fong, Mr. Harden, Ms. Kofi. Thank you for appearing before us again. I have an abiding interest in your work and in what you do. We have to do everything that we can possibly do to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse and mismanagement. And we have to do all we can to assure that USDA programs over which our subcommittee has oversight are operated with the best possible efficiencies in order to create the best possible outcome for those who use the agency. I was particularly pleased to see your annual plan for fiscal year 2019 focuses on many of the concerns that the subcommittee has, from enforcement of Animal Welfare Act to the food safety threats to oversight of disaster assistance programs. We rely on you to conduct audits and investigations to ensure that the programs we fund are run efficiently and that issues are addressed in a timely manner. While I'm glad that you have an active oversight profile, I do have some concerns about the number of recommendations that remain open and the agency's efforts to close them out. Based on your last semi-annual report, there are recommendations pending final agency actions going back to 2005. We'd like to hear your thoughts on how to incentivize the agency to act. So today I'd like to hear more about your plans to conduct adequate oversight of USDA programs, as well as the challenges that you face in ensuring agreed upon recommendations are implemented. In addition, I want to ensure that civil rights issues are getting thoughtful and appropriate attention throughout USDA. I look forward to discussing that with you, as well as other important issues, and I thank you again to you and to all of the OIG staff for all that you do. Now let me ask our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Fortenberry, if he has any opening remarks, and I'd like to recognize him at this time.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Bishop, Chairman Bishop, and we appreciate all of your willingness to appear for us today. Ms. Fong, nice to see you again. I think the last time we had direct interaction was on the Agricultural Subcommittee on Nutrition, but I really do appreciate your intensive work and the entire team here. Very grateful. You have a very experienced team, and obviously we're looking forward to your testimony today to understand the progress that you've made to correct any problems, policies, or practices that may be of concern. So that's the primary intent that I have, to learn more about you from what you're doing today. On the one hand, you're our police force out there, making sure that billions are spent legally and effectively. On the other hand, you must audit the programs managed by 29 agencies to ensure that they are operating as designed. Everything from commodity to conservation to school meal programs to rural development loans. You have a big portfolio. I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into a couple of major areas of your work, particularly the investigative work involving fraud and waste and any abuse of taxpayer funds, as well as the audit work, which helps determine if USDA programs are operating as designed, and if you think we need to be in more robust partnership with you in that regard. While certainly the vast majority of farmers and ranchers and participants in nutrition assistance programs are honest people, someone out there will always try to game the system, which makes your work all the more important. And frankly, sometimes I'm amazed at the amount of scheming that certain people will do to commit fraud. As in your testimony, you point out one Detroit store defrauded the WIC program alone by $2 million. Someone else stole $174.7 million from the Rural Business Cooperative Service, as I understand it, Business and Industry Loan Program. So I will be very interested to hear what tools you have in place to identify and act upon these types of fraud and abuse situations sooner. It's not just about improper use of taxpayer dollars. When this type of activity happens to your attention, and why a producer was able to break the law and put millions of pounds of meat and poultry into the marketplace without safety inspection and not be caught for years. I think this would be a good thing to delve deeper into, and maybe we can revisit that after your testimony. So it's my understanding that for the year, the budget request is $98.2 million, the same level of funding you received last year. Of course, we'll decide if your agency deserves or desire, and you can point out if you desire more resources to oversee such the massive portfolio with over $200 billion in assets. So again, Ms. Fong, your real dedication to public service speaks for itself, and we're grateful to have you and your impressive team here. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. And before Ms. Fong begins, a reminder to members that, as is customary with our subcommittee, members will be recognized by seniority for those who were here when I gavel the hearing to order, and then in the order of arrival after that. I will alternate majority and minority members, and we will adhere to the 5-minute rule. Ms. Fong, without objection, your entire written testimony will be included for the record. I'll recognize you now for your statement, and then we'll proceed with questions. You may summarize, or you may give the entire statement. It is completely up to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Fortenberry, and members of the committee. It is a real pleasure to be here again this year to talk with you about our work at USDA, and we appreciate your invitation. I want to start out by thanking this subcommittee for the support that you have given us over the years. In addition to our FY19 funding level, which is very helpful to us, you also included the OIG in the disaster recovery supplemental last year, and that's been very, very helpful to us in terms of planning oversight of the department's disaster work. So we appreciate that ongoing support. And as you all know, you've referenced it, our job within USDA OIG is to help the department deliver its programs more effectively and with integrity. And we do that through a number of different products, and I think today we may be able to highlight some of the new approaches that we are taking in addition to audit and investigation. But in the end, as you mentioned, we make recommendations, and it is up to the department officials to implement those recommendations that they see fit to implement. And I think that is where the rubber really hits the road. As you have my written statement, you see the range of things that we are working on. So I just want to mention a few highlights that struck me as we were preparing for this hearing. I want to emphasize that the safety of USDA employees is a very significant and top priority for our office. We recently issued an audit report on sexual misconduct and harassment concerns in Region 5 of the Forest Service and what the Forest Service is doing to address those issues. But I want to highlight the fact that these issues and our work extends beyond the Forest Service. Within USDA as a whole, we want to send the message that we take very seriously any allegation or complaint of sexual misconduct. Our investigators can and do respond immediately in many instances to allegations of sexual assault and other criminal misconduct. And we have had some very good results, very quick results, working with federal prosecutors in some of these cases. Turning to another part of USDA, as has been mentioned, we do focus significant resources on oversight of SNAP and the nutrition programs. And we are in the middle of issuing a series of reports on the Summer Food, Summer Feeding program, which provides meals to students during the summer when school is not in session. We have a series of audit reports in this area, as well as very significant investigative results due to bad actors in this program. Finally, I want to note we have summarized a number of reports in the farm program, conservation program, and rural development, as well as crop insurance. And we also focus quite a bit of attention on management issues affecting the department as a whole, namely financial management, financial statements, cybersecurity, and improper payments. Progress in these areas requires continued attention by all of us. So in closing, I want to thank this subcommittee for your support, your ongoing interest in our work, and we look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fong. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm grateful for all of the work that your office does, so I don't want any of it to go to waste. Looking at your last semi-annual report, as of September 30th, 2018, there were 359 audit recommendations awaiting final action by USDA agencies. 2/3 of these pending items were for 2017 and prior years, with the oldest from 2005. Why do so many take years to be implemented? What are your plans to call attention to those issues? How can you help the agencies or maybe shame them into action? And what do you need from us to help close these recommendations?
Okay, let me make a few comments, and then Gil may have some comments as well. We make a priority to follow up with the department on our recommendations. This is a joint responsibility between the Office of the Chief Financial Officer and the program agencies, and then our office as well. And we have, over the years, tried to think of initiatives to assist the department in this area. A year or two ago, we issued a report taking a look at the CFO's office and how it was managing that whole system of closing out final audit recommendations. We made a number of recommendations to that office, which I think they agreed with and are in process of implementing. In addition, we asked the question, what can we ourselves do to shine more light on this? And so we've started a new line of products, which we call Final Agency Verification Reports, where we pick several audits from the past each year, and we go in and we take a look at the agency actions to see if the agencies really accomplished what they said they were going to do, or whether there's still work to be done. And I think the first two that we issued looked good. The agencies were doing a good job. Obviously, there is still more progress that can be made.
And I would add, there is a significant number of outstanding recommendations without final action. That is a discussion we have had with the department for the last several years to bring focus to that part of the process. We have a continuing dialogue with them to see how that's progressing, but we're also using these final action verification reviews as ways to do an additional check to see that they implemented what they agreed to implement. We also, for significant audits, when we do follow-up audits, we go in and see how effectively they implemented the recommendations. We have several in that line over the last couple of years with related to food safety. We have upcoming work related to animal care that will look at how they've addressed prior recommendations as well.
Okay, in April of 2018, the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency issued its first ever report on top management and performance challenges. At the top of the list was information technology security and management. I'm glad to see that you will devote some of your 2019 resources to that issue. Last fall, your office issued an audit of USDA's efforts to improve security for its information technology systems. And in short, you gave USDA an overall score of, quote, ineffective, end quote, for IT security program. There was also another audit where you found USDA did not fully implement federally mandated security requirements. What's the primary cause of USDA's ineffective security posture? Is it complacency, lack of management priority, lack of resources, or is it just an impossible problem to fix? Our subcommittee invests hundreds of millions of dollars a year on IT for USDA agencies to deliver their programs. And based on your audits, would you put money into systems that have ineffective security protection?
I think IT systems are a fact of life for managing and delivering complex programs. And our job here is to make sure that those systems are as good as they can be and they meet all standards. We do look at these systems every year, as you mentioned, and USDA is making what I would characterize as slow progress forward. There is a commitment to attacking these issues at the department level. The challenge that we have seen over the last 5 to 10 years is that there is a commitment on the part of the CIO's office, but then it needs to trickle down to all the agencies, all the program managers. And that's a difficult thing in a complex, large organization.
Yeah, I would add to that they have made changes recently to centralize at the agency level, at the mission area level, CIO activity, so there's more of a connection between the departmental CIO and agency CIOs to try and bring that together. This would be the first year that that's been effective, and so as we go through doing FSMA, the IT security review that we do every year, as well as other IT reviews that we do, that is a question that we're asking to see how well that's helping them do that.
Ms. Coffey, anything to add?
I'm going to say that the IT expertise lies with my colleague as opposed to the investigation side of the house. I mean, periodically we do see some issues that arise with IT, but not from really the security perspective for investigations.
Thank you very much. I think my time has expired. Mr. Fortenberry.
Let's return to the case that I brought up earlier, where you had a massive recall of meat and poultry that was on the market for a number of years. So what broke here? What was not enforced? Why was it not enforced? Why did it take you a long time to catch it?
Let me offer a couple of...
And let me step back further and I'll ask you one more question. Is our food safe? Now, in all fairness, I asked Dr. Gottlieb last week at the Food and Drug Administration the same things. There's overlapping responsibilities here, but it ultimately is that question.
Our mission in OIG is to deal with the problem situations. I would hesitate to say that the problems are pervasive, but when they occur, they do occur, and they have a significant impact, millions of pounds of recalls, as you mentioned.
You think this is, I would assume this is an isolated incident, but to the degree that we do not want this isolated incident generalizable to a trend or principle, I think you need to speak to. How isolated is it?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, that the questions that we always like to ask are, was this a systemic issue? Was there a breakdown in controls? Or was it just a real bad actor who got very creative? This particular fact situation, I think, was perhaps a little unusual, and Ann can comment. My understanding of it is we had a processor in California who had a grant of inspection for a facility and had a second facility and was processing meat at both of those facilities, did not have a grant of inspection at the second one, and was labeling the products from the second facility as coming out of the first. And so on its face... He shouldn't do that. No, he shouldn't do that. And I'm sure FSIS is not happy either.
So walk through the mechanism by which this was caught, and then why did it take several years?
So in terms of how we get the information, normally we have to obtain individuals who step forward. Obviously, FSIS was not aware that there was a second facility that was operating illegally until it obtained information, and I can't really get into the specifics in a public setting as to how we came across that information. But we identified the fact that there was a second facility that was alleged to be producing this misbranding the meat that had not gone through federal inspection.
Well, I think the question, though, is, again, did we have enough internal robust controls to get to find this out, or did, look, I understand it happens a lot of times in law enforcement. There's a tip or you stumble upon something inadvertently. I get that. But again, I think the heart of the question is, are the controls, the system robust enough to have caught something like this so that we know that it's not systemic? Or is this such a peculiar, isolated case that everything that we have in place still wouldn't have caught it?
I would say that in this particular instance, it is falling into the realm of a more peculiar instance where you don't normally, when we've had recalls that you may have seen that have been public previously, they're usually because there's been some sort of outbreak or illness that has come about, and it's not necessarily due to a fraud that's occurred. There may be some internal controls within a particular plant that may have broken down that led to that. In this case, FSIS, if they're not aware that there was a second facility that was operating.
It just seems the level of volume is high enough to have drawn suspicion. Or it's just peculiar that no one would have known that there's some second facility given the volume here.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. That would be really something that FSIS, in terms of investigations, we look at sort of how the fraud was perpetrated and then proving that it actually occurred and then pursuing prosecution of those individuals.
So this came to you from external sources?
That's correct.
But you do raise a good point. We will go back and look at our investigative file and see if there's any indication there that a control may have been bypassed that we can pass on to FSIS in terms of addressing the issue for the future. We'll take a look at that specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I can't, I'm just trying to imagine what a second meat processing packing facility looked like that escaped anybody's notice. I mean, it just is, again, a peculiar kind of thing. And it begs the question, is the system that we have in place adequate to catch this, or do we defer to that very random, peculiar incident that this one fell through the cracks?
We'll take a look at that and see if there's anything there that we can offer to FSIS in terms of analyzing trend data, perhaps. That might be useful.
Thank you.
Ms. Pingree.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the work that you do and for being here with our committee today. I have a lot of concerns about the proposed relocation and reorganization of NIFA and ERS. I think every Democrat on this subcommittee and I have expressed our opposition to the plan. And we've heard from farmers, university, former leaders of these research agencies who are also opposed. I guess everybody kind of wants to know why this proposal seemed to come out of nowhere, and it just seems like the agency is still pulling things out of thin air to justify it. Stakeholders have suggested to me that the ERS reorganization was proposed because research coming out of the agency didn't align with the administration's views on topics such as SNAP or climate change. That would be of great concern to me, and I think we should take those allegations seriously. So I'm wondering if the OIG's report on the reorganization and relocation of USDA research agencies will look into this look into these allegations.
As you mentioned, we have an ongoing review of the relocation reorganization, and we had set out our scope and objectives very succinctly at the beginning of our review. Until very recently, we had not heard any information that there may be a concern about research not aligning with the administration's views. That is a very new piece of information that we have just heard. It is not part of our audit scope because it's new. If there are allegations that are of concern on that matter, we would be very interested in discussing that with anybody who has any information on that. In the meantime, our audit inspection is going forward, and I think our field work is just about done on that. Gil?
Yeah, we're closing in on the end of field work for that, and we'll start discussing, what issues we have and whether we have recommendations to make with the department in the very near future, and then proceed after that reporting.
Okay, we'll follow up with you on that so that any allegations that are being raised will be clear to you and you can proceed. So another question. Last month, my colleague, Congresswoman DeLauro, who's not here with us right now, and I sent a letter to the Office of Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services, and there we were requesting an investigation into reports that the food and beverage industry had inappropriately influenced public health policy through relationships with high-level CDC officials. There were specific concerns about agencies setting priorities based on industry-funded research. As I know you know, DHHS and USDA work together to jointly publish the dietary guidelines for Americans every 5 years. The 9th edition of Dietary Guidelines will be published in 2020, and the first meeting of the advisory committee was just announced yesterday. The dietary guidelines have important implications for federal nutrition programs and inform other health and food policies. So has your office previously looked into whether and how the food and beverage industry has influenced the dietary guidelines? Given that there were just reports of potential inappropriate influence at DHHS, how do we make sure that the dietary guidelines are based on objective scientific information and not industry-funded research?
To answer your first question, we have not done work on dietary guidelines in the past. Gil's confirming that. In terms of moving forward, we'd have to give that some thought as to how we could design work to evaluate that. We would welcome a chance to dialogue on that issue. Since it is a new issue for us, we have not spent time thinking about that.
Great. Well, I'm very happy to raise 2 new issues for you. And I will, I'll follow up on both so that we can just pursue the conversation a little more than just today. But thank you again for your work, and I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Molinar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for being here and for the work you're doing to ensure that the USDA is open and transparent and producing recommendations to eliminate and limit fraud within the agency. And I wanted to ask about, according to your written testimony, the OIG in 2018 issued 42 final audit reports and made 203 recommendations to strengthen and improve USDA programs and operations. And you highlighted certain cases where agencies generally agreed with your findings or recommendations. It's hard to imagine agencies wouldn't follow up with your recommendations aimed at improving their operations or programs, but are there certain agencies or programs that you find are on your radar screen that don't seem to follow up with your recommendations?
I guess the way I would start that is that we do have a very good, I think, professional relationship with all the agencies in the department in terms of us bringing the concerns that we have through the audits that we do. We have good, healthy dialogue debate as we are coming to what caused the problems and what would be the appropriate recommendations. Where we have seen breakdowns in the past is that the agencies agreed with what we were wanting to do. They went about implementing that, and when we went back in, sometimes it wasn't as effective as they wanted it to be, and so we may have had some additional work. But even though there are a large number of recommendations that they're working on, it is not a relationship where there's constant pushback on what should be able to get at the root of the problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I would offer that when we have very productive dialogue and there may not be agreement on a recommendation, it's not confined to a particular agency or group of agencies. It would be very topic specific or recommendation specific in the sense that it may be a particular policy that agency feels strongly about.
Okay. And does the OIG have internal enforcement mechanisms to ensure compliance, or is that it's all based on recommendations? And then, as you mentioned, you have the final agency verification reports that kind of report as to whether it's being followed up on?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have the power of persuasion.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. In the audit of the Food and Nutrition Services financial statements for fiscal year 17 and 18, the finding states that the FNS high-risk programs were not compliant with the requirements of the Improper Payments Information Act. Were there recommendations that you had, or what was it that they weren't in compliance with?
Yeah, annually we do work on the compliance with improper payment reporting. And that focuses on the 10 departmental programs that are high-risk programs. 5 of those programs are FNS nutrition programs. It's SNAP, school lunch, school breakfast, WIC, and CACFP. And they have not met one or more of the requirements over the 7 years that we've reported on that compliance. And so we've had a series of recommendations over the years and have made recommendations this year. Although we've seen progress at the department level in terms of reporting it, it's just a matter of, for some of the FNS programs, that they get some of their data up to date so they have ways of producing the estimates of what the improper payments should be and reaching their targets.
In your written testimony, you mentioned that OIG makes recommendations to improve how programs operate. During fiscal year 2018, your audit and investigative work resulted in potential monetary results totaling more than $368 million. That's significant. If the recommendation had been made for the audit of FNS's financial statements, how would that dollar amount be affected?
The information coming behind that does not result in what we would have as a question cost or funds to be put to better use. That's driven by what the agency is doing to comply with those reporting requirements. We have done work in the past to look at the quality of those improper payment estimates and have found weaknesses, particularly with the SNAP program. We issued a report in 2015 where FNS agreed to kind of retool the whole way that it did the error rate for that program. Also, we have done work in school lunch and school breakfast, which has very high error rates, so that they can go in trying to look at how they come up with that number, and is there ways that we can offer a better way to get at that number. And they were receptive to recommendations on both of those fronts.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. McCullum?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 2018, the Forest Service was doing an environmental reviews on proposed mineral withdrawals of the National Forest System lands. Metho headwaters in Washington State, an area in the heart of the North Cascades, and important for water quality, wildlife protection, recreation, and salmon recovery and restoration. The migrant crevice in Montana, in former Secretary Zinke's backyard, 30,000 acres of public land just north of Yellowstone National Park, where mining could damage the environment and hurt the area's tourism-based economy, and the Rainy River watershed in Minnesota, just outside the Boundary Waters Canoe Wilderness Area, the most visited wilderness area in the country. Sulfide ore mining pollution could cause irreparable harm to these pristine waters, and you don't have to take my word for it. In a letter that I have, former Forest Service Chief Thomas L. Tidwell issued a denial of consent to renew 2 leases in the withdrawal area in December 2016. He concluded, and I quote, "The inherent potential risk of mining near the BWCA," I quote again, "might cause serious and irreplaceable harm to this unique, iconic, and irreplaceable wilderness area." I point this out because the Forest Service completed the studies in Washington and in Montana, but on September 6th, 2018, Secretary Perdue issued a 1-page press release stating the USDA was canceling the proposed mineral withdrawal study impacting the boundary waters 20 months into a 24-month study. I'm concerned that a different standard was neither fair nor consistent as it applied to the boundary waters as compared to the other 2 mineral withdrawals. The USDA and the Department of Interior followed the established process when assessing the other 2 applications for mineral withdrawals. The Forest Service completed and released a full environmental assessment, and the assessments were submitted to the Bureau of Land Management as part of a complete withdrawal package. It is unclear why the Forest Service deviated from the established process for the study impacting the boundary waters. And a 1-page press release from the Secretary is not adequate substitute for a full environmental assessment and submission of a complete withdrawal application to the BLM. I would ask you, do you agree that canceling the study with just 4 months left seems like an efficient use of time, energy, and taxpayers' dollars? And are you aware of the Forest Service ever canceling a mineral withdrawal in this manner before? If not, can you report back to us who ultimately made this decision to cancel the Forest Service study and how a decision like this was made based on the other 2 studies going forward in the good faith in which the BWCA and Rainy River watershed should have been given the same due consideration?
Thank you for raising that. We have not done any work in that area, so we're not familiar with the study. It's a very interesting set of circumstances. We would be happy to talk with you and your staff to get more information and figure out what assistance we can provide.
That would be helpful. It was very much in the press. Mr. Chair, I know my time is limited, but I would like to ask the Forest any comments you would like to make on what the Forest Service has been doing in its initiatives to address workplace misconduct. I also am the chair of the Interior Committee, where there's overlapping jurisdiction. I'm very concerned about what is going on, and if you think that there's any work that we should be following up on.
As you know, we just recently issued our report on sexual harassment and misconduct for Region 5. It was designed around the agreement that Forest Service had with the department at the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights level and OGC in terms of a plan for making the workplace better in Region 5. We found that they had been implementing what they had agreed to in the plan, but there were some other areas where we saw improvements to the workplace that they could make. One of them notably was doing better background checks or reference checks on people that are being hired. They weren't asking direct enough questions to know that people had sexual misconduct or harassment issues in their past, and then they were promoted into other supervisory positions. In response to questions that we got in a hearing related to that subject in last November, one of the things that we are currently doing is that we have asked, I have polled my counterparts in the oversight community to draw out reports that everybody in the community has done related to this issue, so that we can possibly talk to Forest Service about best practices or other standards that others have applied that they may need to consider. I know that we'll be in continuing discussion with Forest Service as well as members and their staffs because of the interest in this area and additional work that may be considered.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looks like we have some work to do together.
Last September, Majority Leader Hoyer and Congresswoman Norton asked your office to look at USDA's proposal to relocate the Economic Research Service and the National Institute for Food and Agriculture and to reorganize ERS under the Office of the Chief Economist. Your written testimony indicated your office will be performing this review. Can you briefly tell us about the scope of the project and what the status is? When do you expect to issue your results, and can you give us a preview of what you found so far?
Be happy to comment on that. We have started work on that in response to the request. The scope of the work is to look at the department's legal authorities to do a reorganization and a reprogram of those funds, a relocation, to look at the department's budget authority to do those actions, and third, to determine if the department followed any procedures that it has governing relocations and reorganizations. So we are looking at those three issues in particular response to the request. We have just about finished our field work. We've been working very diligently to obtain all the information that we need. We've been talking and interviewing witnesses. I think we're almost at the stage where we're going to start drafting a report. And at that point, we will be talking with all of the stakeholders about what we are seeing. We are also very aware of this committee's interest in those issues.
Thank you. I'm happy to see that your 2019 audit plan includes a review of animal care programs overseen by the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services, specifically on animal breeders and exhibitors. News reports indicate that there's been a dramatic drop in APHIS citations in 2018 over previous years. Will you be looking into the reasons for that drop?
Yes.
Do you have any indications at this point what some of those reasons might be?
No, I don't have anything on the reasons. We are aware of what's been reported in the media, but this work will follow up on work that we did and recommendations that we made to this program in an earlier audit. And in knowing what they are reporting is part and parcel to understanding how they're running the program for both the breeders as well as the exhibitors.
Thank you. We just had the longest shutdown in history, during which food inspectors were working without pay, and USDA issued SNAP benefits for February early, causing most recipients to have a gap of up to 50 days while waiting for the March benefits to be issued. This resulted in increased demand for food at food pantries and other assistance outlets. Some FSA employees were called back to work. Do you have any plans to review any agency operations during the shutdown?
That is not in our current work plan. As you mentioned, we published our FY 2019 work plan, and that we published that before the shutdown. I think as we go through our work, as it touches those agencies and those programs, if an impact from shutdown surfaces, we will certainly address that. And if there are other concerns that come forward, we're happy to consider any other concerns.
Okay. According to your last semi-annual report, your office received almost 5,000 complaints through the OIG hotline between April and September of 18. You reviewed 137 of those complaints, under 3% of the total. The majority of the complaints, 91%, were referred to the USDA agencies for responsive tracking. Do you have a process to follow up with the referred entities to see if they took appropriate actions? How do you ensure the agencies did their due diligence? And what do you need from us so that legitimate hotline complaints are properly dealt with?
So the hotline falls under investigations. We do have a process in place for the entire year. Last year, we received over 12,000 complaints that came into the OIG hotline. The majority, I would say probably about 96% of those were related to SNAP recipient individuals who are calling in to report that there's some sort of fraud in either the eligibility status of individuals who are receiving benefits or that they're misusing their benefits. In those instances, we usually work with FNS to follow up on those. The ones that we do refer to the program agencies other than FNS, we do have a process in place where the agencies are required to respond to our office to provide information, whatever information they've identified based on the complaint when they've looked into the matter, and we are looking at those responses and making a determination whether or not we believe that has resolved the matter or they've adequately looked at it, or if we need to raise it to a higher level within the agency. So we do follow up on those investigations.
Thank you. My time has expired. Mr. Fortenberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Who is the expert on ephemeral gully erosion?
I don't know that I would use the word expert, but yes, there was a report
that
had those words in it.
The Natural Resource Conservation Service issued new guidelines. This can happen to farmers inadvertently. There is an issue about tilling. Concern expressed by the agency that this would put someone out of compliance. I support the conservation compliance requirements, but I want to make sure that farmers have time to comply with the new requirements and do not get disqualified from crop insurance or other farm programs because there may not either have been time for information training, or secondarily, is there enough flexibility built into the program, giving different regional considerations and different weathering conditions in regions to make it viable for farmers to actually respond appropriately with enough time, with proper agency notification. Can you comment on these matters?
I'll take it from the aspect that yes, we had concerns with that portion of the program and made recommendations to NRCS to make improvements. We relied basically on their management expertise in terms of what they needed to do to fix it, and if they had a time frame that they wanted to do that in. We didn't, on our side, have a way of saying, well, it should have been 10 years or 5 years or 3 years. We usually try and work with them in their expertise in knowing that. Now, if they went about implementing those recommendations or those changes in response to the recommendations and realized, hey, this wasn't going to work as well as it could have been, if it's related to something they agreed to with us, there's a process in place for them to come back to us and say, hey, what we've agreed to really won't work. We need to change what we're doing. so that it doesn't impact the farmers that you're talking about.
So is it fair to say that in our CS, should you have to go through a notice and comment period before having these conservation compliance changes go through? So then again, farmers aren't inadvertently caught in a system that may result in the loss of farm program eligibility?
I would have to go back and find out.
I think it's an important question. That's the heart of the matter.
Okay, I would have to go back and find out why they did or did not go through a notice and comment period.
Okay. Based upon what's in front of me, that's not clear to me either. But if, let's presume there was not a comment period, I think, again, the issue, given certain complexities of different regions and certain weather patterns, of having proper advance notice before there's an enforcement against a farmer is only fair.
That makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I've learned, Mr. Chairman, how to take yes for an answer, so that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's been a lot of political angst and discussion over fraud and abuse in the SNAP program. But the fraud and abuse, if there is to be found much in the SNAP program, would pale in comparison to the amount of money that appears to be involved in the crop insurance when fraud is happening. So last year, your office was involved in a few investigations involving crop insurance fraud. The one case, party in question was found guilty of defrauding taxpayers out of more than $5.6 million in false insurance claims, sentenced up to 25 months in prison, is prohibited from participating in crop insurance program for 5 years. Another, the party was sentenced to 13 months in prison for illegally obtaining crop insurance and claiming crop losses for land he did not farm, and to pay $500,000 in restitution. Crop insurance is a vital tool for our farmers in Minnesota and throughout this country, but reports of fraud at this level are very troubling. In the budget that was released yesterday, the administration calls for some crop insurance reforms, including new means testing that would limit the program to producers with an adjusted gross income of $500,000 or less. Do you think reforms like these, based on the information that you've been learning, the one proposed in the president's budget in particular, would help address some of the fraud that we see in the crop insurance program? Or can you talk about any other work your office is doing to address fraud within the crop insurance program or other subsidy programs for the authorizers to deal with and to make sure that the appropriators make sure every penny is spent appropriately?
I have not had a chance to look at the information that was in the president's budget with respect to the crop insurance program. I will say that in a general comment, just in terms of both the food assistance programs as well as the crop insurance programs, that we are utilizing data analytics, and that's a really big, it's a significant help for us to be able to identify the fraud that you see. And obviously there are large dollar amounts, and what we typically have seen in terms of the crop insurance is that there's usually multiple individuals that are associated, that are engaged in the fraud schemes. It's usually not just one producer. There's usually an agent, a producer. There's a very extensive network of individuals that are involved in those programs. And obviously we are working with RMA in trying to identify the fraud. And obviously we'll be looking at the means testing that was put in place to see if that would have an impact with respect to perhaps reducing the fraud.
And on our side, we do have an audit in process that's looking at adjusted gross income requirements for FSA and NRCS programs. We're in the middle of field work on that right now, but that may shed some light on those types of requirements as well.
One of the things that I'm finding in the other committee that I chair with the EPA, we don't have enough people doing inspections and enforcement. Did you uncover any concerns about inspection and enforcement, and if that needs to be beefed up no matter what the reforms are?
We have not looked at that. Again, we really come in sort of at the tail end where there's been an identification that something has occurred, and we proceed to investigate to substantiate those allegations. But I will say, obviously, the use of data analytics has helped significantly in helping us in that particular aspect. I would I'm not sure if Gil has looked at that
Yeah,
aspect.
well, not that particular aspect, but a running theme through a lot of our work is looking at how the agencies oversee the various programs they have in place. And one of the main management challenges that we have pointed out year after year for the department is maintaining that accountability and oversight and having the right type of focus, not only on program delivery, because that is very much important, but also having somebody there in the oversight role to knowing that the money's going where it's intended to go for eligible purposes.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, any kind of reform has to have good oversight with it, and what seems to be a pattern that I'm starting to notice within this administration is that there are jobs that are posted, that there are jobs that could be filled, but they're never posted to be filled, especially in enforcement. So just having the number there without having actually gone out and even sought out the individuals to fill the post will leave the fraud and abuse, no matter what fraud, what reforms you come up with, continue to happen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, I have just a couple of questions, and we'll be ready to, I think, wrap it up. Ms. Fong, small businesses are the cornerstone of our economy, and federal support is especially important for small and disadvantaged businesses in rural areas. That's why I was disturbed to read your audit from last October that found that over $42 million went to small businesses that could not support their claim of being certified as small disadvantaged businesses. That means over $42 million could have gone but did not go to businesses that were at least 51% owned by a woman, by a veteran, by a minority, by other socially or economically disadvantaged individuals. Your audit included 3 recommendations for USDA to help them do a better job of getting money to those who are actually eligible. Have you followed up with USDA to see what actions they've taken, and how confident are you that USDA has improved in getting much-needed federal dollars to the businesses that should be getting this help?
Yeah, I remember that audit very well. It's a very interesting situation. As businesses want to get into the federal sector, they work with SBA to get certified as to their status. Then once they're certified, they can participate in USDA and other programs. And I think one of the findings that we had was that over time, businesses who may have been eligible initially may have graduated or lost their eligibility because they grew or something might have changed. And we saw that there would be a need there to partner with SBA to figure out how to get to those situations. We made some recommendations. It hasn't been 6 months yet, so I think the agency still has a little bit of time to implement, but we will be following up on that.
But one of the most novel things about that recommendation was to get that dialogue going between USDA, asking the questions of people that are part of the program, then sharing what they learn with SBA and GSA.
Okay. Well, it's important that we monitor that closely, because we want to make sure that those dollars go to the small and disadvantaged businesses as they were intended to. The 2018 omnibus included $3 million of discretionary funds for the outreach and assistance for socially disadvantaged and veteran farmers and ranchers program, known as the 2501 program. These funds were intended to supplement $10 million of mandatory funding and be used for grants to support minority and veteran farmers and ranchers. Our understanding is that only a third of the $3 million went to grants, that USDA used over $2 million for training and for a website. Your current annual plan listed an audit of the grants awarded with this money. Can you tell us what the status is of the audit, when the audit will be completed, and what can you share about whether the funds were used properly?
We can definitely take that information into consideration as we're planning the scope and objectives. The original plan for this audit was to follow up on the 2501 grant program, because we had issued 2 reports, and I think 12 and 15, where there had been serious concerns with how the program was run. We would want to of course, take a look at current operations, but to see if they've strengthened the program. That is slotted to begin, I think, in the 4th quarter of fiscal 19, so it'll be kicked off before October.
If you or your staff have particular concerns or objectives that you would like us to look at, we would welcome dialogue on that as we design the audit.
Thank you. Okay. Ms. Fong, Mr. Harden, Ms. Kofi, thank you all for being here today. I know that there are a few things on which you're going to get back with us. We'll also forward additional questions for the record, and we appreciate your diligence in getting your responses to us in a timely manner. Thank you again for your testimony. We look forward to working with you as we continue the fiscal year 2020 process. With that, this subcommittee is adjourned.